Good afternoon. My name is Joe Harris, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the National High School Center and our two presenters, Mindy O'Cummings and Susan Bowles-Terrio, who are co-leaders of our Early Warning System team of experts. This is the first of three webinars that focus on our enhanced Early Warning System high school tool and our new Early Warning System middle grades tool. This session is an introduction and an overview. The December 7th session next week will focus on technical aspects and provide live demos of the middle grades EWS tool and the high school EWS tools. The December 14th webinar will highlight practitioners' use of both tools with presentations and participation from our colleagues in Virginia and California. Before we begin, please note the following housekeeping items. All telephones are on mute and will be on mute for the remainder of the call until we open the phone lines during the Q&A session. If you have if you have questions for our presenters in the meantime, please submit them through the Q&A box on the right part of the screen. If you have comments or issues or messages that you need to send to us, especially if you're having technical difficulties or encounter any problems during the presentation, please send them through the chat box. We have people on hold who will be monitoring the chat box and will respond to you directly. We will also be using the chat box to send you links to various tools and resources that we mentioned throughout the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. We are going to be doing something very unique in that Mindy will be joining us from San Diego, California, and Susan will be joining us from Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts. So let's keep our fingers crossed that the technology will hold up for this. So what you see on the screen right now is an at-a-glance view of and a quick introduction to the National High School Center for those who are new to our work. We are one of 5 content funded by the U.S. Department of Education to work with the regional comprehensive centers and their respective states directly and to provide technology-based assistance, including our EWS tools and our other resources to LEAs in high schools. During this webinar, we will be providing an overview of the research and background on early warning systems, a preview of our new tools, and an introduction to our 7-step implementation process, and an opportunity to respond to live questions from you and other members of the audience. We all know the challenge we are facing and why this work is so important. The statistics are sobering. Approximately 1/4 of all students and close to 1/2 of students with disabilities and some minority subgroups fail to graduate in 4 years, and 1.3 million students per year, or 7,200 students per day, drop out. Many of these students attend what are known as dropout factories, which is a term used to identify schools that graduate 60% or fewer students, but other high schools face challenges of high dropout rates, especially among their subpopulations. The good news is that the number of these dropout factories have been decreasing through dropout prevention efforts such as the America's Promise and more recent initiatives such as the School Improvement Grants. Nevertheless, the economic and social consequences of high school dropout are severe. There are fewer and fewer low-wage jobs for Americans without a high school diploma. To help schools address and prevent dropout, Upworks Clearinghouse and Institute of Education Sciences have issued a dropout prevention practice guide that identifies 7 research-based recommendations, including the use of early warning systems to identify, screen, and monitor students at risk of dropout. The EWS tools enable users to track targeted interventions and consider academic and social and emotional supports. EWS tools and the cycle can also be used to help identify school-wide issues that can be addressed collectively. In short, early warning systems readily available school-level data such as attendance and course performance that can be accessed in a timely fashion to help educators predict which students may be in danger of dropping out of high school and to assign and monitor interventions to address these at-risk behaviors both individually and school-wide. The National High School Centered Early Warning System tools and processes are designed to help schools and districts help more students in school and keep them engaged in learning rather than dropping out. So I'd like to call on one of my colleagues, Mindy O'Cummings, who will provide an overview of the background and research base that supports our early warning system tools, followed by an introduction to some of the key features of our two new tools.
Hi, Joe. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, I would like to take a moment to just go over, and Joe, you spoke already of the purpose of an early warning system, and to turn our attention to what some of the key constructs are within an early warning system. And over the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of research that's come together, and the findings of that research have really converged. And through that, there's three main constructs that have emerged, and those are engagement, course performance, and behavior. And these three constructs have really become known as the key areas that we need to watch to see how students are doing and progressing and or disengaging. As we know, dropping out is a long process of disengagement, and these kind of indicators can help us gauge how students are doing along that process of persistence or disengagement through high school or middle school. And for each of these constructs, there's actually key indicators that we can use to see how students are doing. So, for instance, for engagement, we can look at attendance or absenteeism. For course performance, we can look at course grades, number of credits earned, or grade point average. And behavior, there's things like suspensions and referrals. And all of these, as Jill mentioned previously, are based on readily available data at the district. Before we actually get into the tool and the implementation of an early warning system, to the early warning intervention and monitoring system, I would like to just talk a little bit about the research that really has brought us to believe that these are the correct indicators. Besides being easily implemented because they're based on readily available data, we think that the research base is really strong. So first, turning to high school attendance. The graph on the screen shows the correlation between days absent and students' graduation rate. And this is looking at high school. I'm going to first focus on high school indicators and then turn my attention to middle grades. So in high school, Allensworth and Easton looked at the relationship between attendance and eventual graduation. On the far left-hand side of the screen, you can see that students that were absent only 0 to 4 days during either semester, 87% of those students went on to graduate from high school. In the next column, to the right of that, those students who were absent 5 to 9 days, only 63% of those students went on to eventually graduate high school. And again, that drops drastically when we go to 10 to 14 days to 41%, and it continues to go on. So this definitely demonstrates the strong relationship between attendance and eventual graduation. These patterns continue to reflect throughout the high school years, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. The next slide will show us the similar relationship between course failures and graduation. Again, on the left side, you can see that course failures and those students that only have not failed any courses, 85% of those students go on to graduate. If a student just fails one semester-long course, only 70% of those students will to graduate. And again, this declines with 2 courses, 3, 4, and 5, and so on. Importantly on this slide is that this isn't just looking at those core courses or those gatekeeper courses that we often think of as being highly correlated with student graduation, but instead this is looking at any course failure. So just any single course failure is very predictive of students' eventual graduation or dropping out. On the following slide, it shows a similar relationship between high school graduate GPA. So if you look now on the far right-hand side of the slide, you can see that students with a higher GPA or 3.5 or higher have a significantly high graduation rate of 97%. What happens when that starts to drop? At 3.0 or above, 93%. At 2.5, 86%. So again, there's that really strong relationship between GPA and graduation. At 2.0, we think that's a really significant point where only those students with a 2.0 GPA or lower, only 72% of those students go on to graduate. I think that these slides show a compelling argument that these indicators are the right indicators to look at when we're trying to identify those students that are most risk for dropping out. These indicators can be looked at different times in the year after each grading period. Attendance can even be looked at much earlier after 20 or 30 days of school. Chicago in Consortium on School Research, Allensworth and Easton, also looked at an end-of-year indicator, which we refer to as Chicago's on-track high school indicator. This indicator actually combines two variables. And so here we're looking at students being on track if they have not failed more than one semester-long core course and they've accumulated enough credits for promotion to the 10th grade. If either of those variables are not met, that student is considered off track. And this is although it cannot be calculated until the end of the 9th grade year, continues to be a very strong predictor of students' eventual graduation. The predictive power of this measure is striking. Among Chicago's public schools, over 80% of those students who are on track at the end of 9th grade graduate in 4 years. So the indicators in high school, the National High School Center has been talking about and really digging into. And more recently, we've received a request from many of those that have been using the National High School Early Warning System tool, but in regards to middle grades and asking how is this applicable in the middle grades? Is it applicable? How can we actually bring it down into the middle grades? And this question was again asked to us most recently by the California Department of Education in asking how they could help their middle grades throughout the state in looking at these kind of indicators and using this similar kind of system to target resources at the middle grades level. And the research is also there very compelling. Here on this slide, you can see the same three main constructs with a little bit different variables. And so for engagement, we look at attendance, but rather than what we tend to look at the high school level, which is about a 90%, here at the middle grades level, we're looking at an 80% cut. Course performance and looking at failing a math or an English class. And then behavior, in Balfonte's research, which this is citing, he looked at unsatisfactory behavior grades. And these, again, become very powerful indicators, not only of persistence and transition to high school, but also to graduation. For a student that has demonstrated at least one flag, these students had less than a 1 in 4 likelihood of a 4 to 5 year graduation, eventual graduation. So based on these indicators, the National High School Center and all of the research of our colleagues at Johns Hopkins University and the Consortium on Chicago Schools Research, we've tried to summarize it in a table of both middle grade and high school indicators. And you can see engagement, course performance, and behavior are all listed. In addition on that, we also look at the end-of-year indicator, which I've spoken to, and then we also have kind of brought in the idea of an incoming risk indicator. Although attendance is predictive as early as 20 to 30 days, we know that schools don't even want to wait that long and feel that at that point they've already let a lot of valuable time go by. And so the incoming indicator of risk allows schools to use either locally validated or a summary of the data in early warning system data from a previous year and bring it into the tool prior to the next academic year and be able to provide services based off of that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So that's a summary. We've broken up and started to talk about these indicators in a new way and talk about what kind of indicators they are. And we talk about monitoring indicators. And these indicators allow us to monitor students' progress throughout the academic year. and they're available at those specific times, so attendance after 20 to 30 days, and course performance and behavior after each of the grading periods. We have these end-of-year indicators, like the Consortium and Chicago Schools Research on-track indicator, that summarize academic year's performance and then provide us information if that student's been on or off track. And then we also have these transition indicators that help us be able to determine how a student is going to do from one time period to another, like the incoming indicator. So because of this really kind of convergence of research and the need for schools to really address this dropout problem, as Joe talked about, the severity of the problem and the potential consequences to students and society, and also that schools today are really struggling in these economic times. They have limited resources. They really want to ensure that those resources are targeted at the right students. We've developed an early warning system tool that not only enables schools to identify, using these research-based indicators, which students are at most risk for dropping out, both at the high school and the middle grades level, but also that the same tool can help schools monitor those students' response to interventions. What I would like to do today is turn our attention to some of the features of the early warning system tools that the National High School Center has developed. We, in 2008, released a version of an early warning system tool that was simplistic in nature, that simply very easily allowed schools to enter data and identify those students that are at most risk for dropping out of high school. Subsequent to that, we've had a lot of opportunity to work with districts and states across the country to revise that tool, increase its functionality and usefulness to schools. And that high school tool has continued to evolve to the point it is today. And in the high school tool, it has a lot of features that allows it to be customized to reflect the local context. It has the ability to modify benchmarks or the thresholds based on local validation. It integrates both incoming indicators and school performance. And then it has a multitude of reports that I think schools will find useful to not only examine and identify those students that are at most risk, but also to be able to look at those trends in data across different subgroups of students. More recently, and we're excited to release today, is a middle grades version of that tool. And in this middle grades tool, it has all of the same features that the high school version does, but reflects the research that's applicable to this age group. In addition, we have a couple new reports that are specific to the middle grades. Most specifically, we also enable schools to look at those students that are over age and what different indicators of risk those students might be exhibiting. What I would like to do now is actually show you a little bit about the middle grades tool. And I'm going to highlight this tool today, but again reminding the audience that the high school tool is very similar in nature, just reflecting the different research bases and indicators associated with those. So when the middle grades tool is a Microsoft Excel-based tool that can be downloaded from our website, betterhighschools.org, and it's free of charge. There's both the high school and middle grades version that can be downloaded from there. When you download the tool and open it up in Excel, the first page is just an introductory page that tells you a little bit about the tool and the research base associated with it. From there, you can easily access the main menu. Here, the main menu is set up around the three kind of stages of using the tool. First is tool setup, and then data inputs, and then outputs and reports. In the tool setup, one of the things you can do, as I mentioned earlier, is you can reflect your local context. Here you can tell the tool how many grading periods the school has. Are you on a semester, quarter, trimester system? You can also put into the tool how you may classify your subgroups of students with disabilities, race and ethnicity, ELL status, and disadvantaged status. On the right-hand side, you can see where you can customize the tool's thresholds for each of the indicators. And another feature that we're very excited about in the new tools is that you can also disaggregate the data by cohorts of students that are broken up into a manner that is useful for your school. For instance, in a lot of middle grades, they do team teaching. So students are associated at each, not only by a grade level, but by a team of teachers. And those teachers then are responsible for that team of that grouping of students. And here you could enter those different groupings named into the tool and then run reports by those groupings of students as well. And the last thing is just the kindergarten cutoff, so we can do an overage report. After setting up the tool, you can start to actually upload student information into the tool. And I'm not going through this systematically as we will in the next webinar, which is a week from today, but I did want to highlight some of the key components. Student information, we understand that there's definitely lots of the data that we would like to use in this tool is readily available data in your student information system. So to actually bring data into the tool, all you need to do is create source files and then save those source files and import them into the tool. And then the tool can align that data with the correct student based on student ID number. From once student information and student performance data is actually brought into the tool, you can start to run reports. Before bringing in student performance, we bring student incoming risk status. As I said, this can be based off a locally validated indicator, or the new tools, middle grade and high school, have the opportunity for, if you use the tool in the previous academic year, to export this information. And so it will sum up based off of the last grading period and the end of year indicators, indicator of risk that's associated with the student, that exported indicator can then come into the tool as the incoming risk indicator in the subsequent year. And that can be brought into this page here, or this can be based off of another criteria set by the school. After bringing in the incoming risk status information, student performance is brought in after the first 20 or 30 days of school, and then again after each of the grading periods. Again, this information is based off of importing source files that can be created by most student information systems. From this, student risk status reports can be easily viewed. The student risk status page not only shows all of the students and if they were flagged for risk for any of the indicators in the tool, but also can be sorted or filtered by demographic, cohort, or time frame to enable users to really hone in on the information of interest at that time. From here and from other places on the tool, student interventions can be assigned to individual students. So based off of a catalog list of interventions that are available at your school that are entered into the tool, you can then assign those to students. And this enables the user then to monitor students' responses to those individual interventions. The report control panel is where actual specific reports can be generated from the tool based off of the data provided. And here, there's two different types of reports, both the school and the student level reports. School level reports are graphical representations of the data that don't identify any individual students, but instead enable users to really analyze trends in the data, either over time or by different subgroups of students. The student level reports are those students that actually list students' names and their indicators of risk or interventions to enable users to really understand what's going on for those individual students that may be at most risk for dropping out. Other reports are a detailed student report, which is similar to a report card on the early warning system indicators for individual students, and also lists those interventions available. And then we have an intervention summary report. What I'd like to do at this point is show you just a few of these reports. The first one is an example of a school level report. This risk indicator summary report shows those students that are graphically represents the proportion of students that are at risk during the first grading period for each of the indicators versus not at risk. The darker blue portion of the graph is those students that are at risk, and the lighter blue is for those that are not flagged. The next report is the same type of information, but it's a student level report. Here it lists those students that are at risk and shows for what indicator those students are at risk. Also, students that have dropped out or left the school remain in the tool, but those students are grayed out. As I said, there's one new report that we've integrated into the middle grades early warning system tool, and this is the overage student report. This report identifies all of the students within that within your cohort or school that are over age, 2 years over age for that grade level, and then looks at if those students are flagged or not flagged for any of the indicators and what interventions those are receiving, acknowledging that these students may be at a higher risk for dropping out or other problems. As I said, next week we'll do a technical webinar where we'd like to go more in depth into not only the features of the early warning system tools, but also how to use those tools. Instead, what we'd like to do right now is actually look at the early warning implementation and monitoring system process. And so for that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Bowles-Terrio.
Thank you, Mindy, and thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar today. I'm going to talk about sort of the culmination of work that we've been doing over the past 3 years at the National High School Center, in parallel working on early warning system tools. We started to realize, as we worked very closely with several states, districts, and schools on implementing early warning systems, that while the tools provided readily available information in really user-friendly ways, there was additional information needed to guide schools and districts as they move through this process to make this data really actionable. So what you're going to see today is a result of a combination of an examination of data use in schools and the research on data use, effective practices of data use in schools, as well as the experience of many practitioners who provided some really intense feedback to us over the course of these years as they've been implementing, and really helping us to hone in on where the challenges are and where those areas are that they really needed assistance. So through that work, we've developed a 7-step implementation process, and the 7-step implementation process guides users through the system as we go, as they start to implement use an early warning system tool. And the early warning system tool, I should also say, both tools that we've developed is actually aligned with this EWIMS 7-step process, but the EWIMS process could also be used in other instances when other tools are being used. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are 7 steps in the system, and the first step is pretty basic. Basically, there needs to be a group of individuals who are responsible for looking at this early warning system data. We highly recommend developing an early warning system team, and over the years we've actually learned quite a few things about what is necessary on this team. But one thing we also have noted is that the team needs to be established and the roles and responsibilities need to be clearly decided, but the team doesn't actually have to operate separately from other existing teams in the school. For example, in one state, in Virginia, where we worked, the State Department of Education actually highly encouraged schools to make the early warning system team a key function of the school improvement team. And that's a really important point. Basically, people need to be doing this work in conjunction with lots of other things that they have going on in the school, and the degree to which it can be aligned with existing efforts makes it a lot easier to implement. Also, the team, there are skills that the team members need to bring to the table. Those skills include at least one person needs to have the ability to analyze data, manage and use the tool, and actually organize the team toward a common goal. There are also some key elements that need to be present among the membership of the team that we've kind of called down, and primary to those is the authority to make decisions and take real action about students or groups of students in the school. Now, we've seen that play out in a number of ways. In some cases, it's the principal delegating power to a team, or actually, in many cases, the principal is an active participant on the team, therefore streamlining, making quick decisions about students and what their needs are. And the whole idea behind this system that we've developed is to have a really sensitive student support system that can look at information, make some decisions about the needs of students, and assign support. So quickly get that information to students. The other thing that we've really valued as we've observed these teams in operation is diversity of the team. So in some cases I've seen community members be fluid members of the team, so perhaps it's not always appropriate for them to be part of focused student level discussions, but in the bigger picture, on the school climate types of issues, they can be an active member to help address some of the needs of the school. But also important is to have a diverse representation of adults who work with students in the school. And so what you'll often see initially when we're looking at early warning systems teams is that it's really assigned to the counselor. So the school counselor is supposed to lead this team. And truly, the school counselor is a really significant member of any of these teams. However, you also need to have representation from teachers who are teaching English language arts, mathematics, specialists, special education teachers, EL teachers, coaches. We want as many adults who are interacting with these students on a regular basis to be present, because it will create much richer conversations about the needs of these students. So step 2, seeming like a very basic step, which is using the tool. You need to import data into the tool. Data needs to be imported on a routine basis. Otherwise, you can't look at reports. The whole idea behind this, again, is to get in there early and be looking at information as early as possible. It's important to set up a schedule of when you'll be exploring this information, how you're going to make decisions, and to train team members just to understand what the indicators are within the tool and how they can be understood. And then also you're able to monitor progress of the students. So what are those indicators? In the EWS middle grades tool, this table provides you an overview of the indicators and the monitoring timeframes we've identified. So this is like a suggested frequency with which you could actually look at this data. So the first is the incoming indicator, which is an indicator of risk based on prior information prior to entering into middle school. It's information you can get before school begins, so it's something that a team could look at before the first day of school, and where you could have some supports ready for students as soon as they walk in the door. In this case, the middle grades incoming indicator is a locally validated indicator. Then there's the attendance indicator, which, as Mindy mentioned, can be looked at as soon as the first 20 or 30 days of school. It's also, you can look at it at each grading period as well as the end of the year. So you can see there's a pattern here as to when you can start looking at this data. For the middle grades, the risk threshold is for students who've missed 20% or more of instructional time or absences. And then there's course failures. Again, you can look at this each grading period and at the end of the year. And in the middle grades, a failure grade in either English language arts or mathematics course within a single grading period is a flag of risk. And then there's the behavior indicator. Now this is a locally validated risk threshold that needs to be determined in the school. Once it is determined, it can be looked at, and depending what it is, it could be suspensions, referrals, or even behavior grades in the middle grades. It can be looked at as frequently as each grading period or at the end of the year. And then as an end-of-year indicator, you can use it, what we call the EWS middle grades tool exit indicator, which is basically any student who was flagged in the final grading period is then identified as flagged for the incoming indicator of risk as they move on to the next grade or into high school. And now at the high school level, it's the same time periods. You'll see incoming indicator can be based on the EWS middle grades tool. And then the attendance in high school is a little different. The risk threshold is whether a student has missed 10% or more of instructional time. Course failures is whether a student has failed one or more semester courses in any subject, and that's important to emphasize. And then GPA, whether they've earned a 2.0 or lower on a 4-point scale, and again, that's customizable in our tool. And then a behavior indicator, which is a locally validated threshold. An on-track indicator, which is the Consortium for Chicago School Research on-track indicator, which is whether a student's failed 2 or more courses or accumulated fewer credits than those required to be promoted to the next grade. And so that's the idea of understanding what the risk thresholds are and the frequency with which you can actually look at this data. So step 3, that's about reviewing the data. So once you have the tool loaded, which is a really important first step, you actually have the opportunity to look at some really user-friendly reports and consider the way you might be able to use this data. And what's important about reviewing the data is it lets you look at it on multiple levels. You can hone in on an individual student, or you can explore student-level patterns from a school-level perspective. So I just wanted to show you quickly some of those reports. So this is an example of a school-level report printed. I'm not sure if you can see it or not, but here in quarter 1. And it shows the numbers of students who are flagged and who are not flagged. So I can see that there are 7 students here who are flagged in the first year, or the first 20 days of school. And then here, you can go down the list, you can see the different types of flags, and then here at the end, you can see any flags. So there are 11 students total who have 1 or more flags in any of these areas. So it gives you a gauge of where you're at with your school. And then you can also look as a team at the school-level report, and you can quickly see students who are falling off track immediately. So Catherine, right here, you can see, she's been identified as at risk based on the incoming indicator and has also missed the first 20 days. So you can imagine that that would be a person you would want to be paying attention to because she seems to be displaying many indicators of risk. And then you can look down the line with these different students. For example, Shannon Fanning, she failed the English course in quarter 1. So the next step is about interpreting the EWS data. And a frequent question we get is, what is the difference between step 3 and step 4? I cannot tell you how quickly people want to jump and say, okay, this student's off track for attendance, let's assign them to this sort of intervention. And the truth is, we all know that there are a myriad of reasons why a student has missed many days of attendance or is failing a course. And because of that, we need to take step 4 and start interpreting the data. Step 4 is about looking closely at a specific subset of students who have displayed root causes. I've seen teams divide up this type of work based on having certain teams look at students who are having attendance issues, certain students who are having course failure in mathematics or in English language arts, and get more information. So how do you get more information? You can look at student records, you can look at their prior academic achievement levels and identify some possible areas that may be challenges for the student. You can talk to the adults who interact with that student on a daily basis in the school. Or you can talk to the student themselves and find out what's going on with that student. All of this is a reconnaissance mission to get more information about the student and start to make some really solid decisions about what the types of supports the student may need. And the whole idea behind this is you've got a smaller subset that you can see are falling off track. So you're casting that net, you're getting a few, and you're starting to look more closely at what they might need and what the school might have to offer to get them back on track. And then the other thing that you want to make sure you're doing at this point is just really, truly understanding the characteristics of the individual students, but also the characteristics of the students as a whole. Are there some common themes coming up among these students when you look at the root causes, and how does that impact what you're doing in the school? Step 5 is about assigning interventions. So after you've identified the students who are at risk, you're starting to hone in and understand their needs. The early warning system team has to assign these students to appropriate interventions to help them get back on track. They can use and tailor available dropout prevention and academic and behavior supports in the school and district and community to help these students. And then, so one thing that I wanted to mention here is that when we talk about interventions, we are not talking about typical dropout prevention interventions per se. In some cases, that may be what is needed. But in many cases, you have to remember, we're identifying these students early. They're displaying early symptoms of risk. So they actually may not need a full program or intervention. They may need additional support with reading or literacy, or they may need some tutoring in math because they're falling behind. And so this is the idea behind this is to, again, have a really sensitive system that lets you get in there quickly. Now, this interventions piece is a huge piece and a huge point where I've observed schools struggle. And so one thing that the National High School Center has done is explored ways to systematize their approach to providing support to students around dropout prevention interventions. And we've seen this work done actually in New Hampshire and Minnesota. And basically, the way this triangle is designed is to increase intensity based on the needs of students as they move up the triangle. So Tier 1 interventions are generally applied to all students in the school. They're about school climate issues, school engagement in general. And then Tier 2 is interventions that are moderately or intensive and applied to small groups of students with common needs, sometimes individual students. Tier 3 interventions are the most intensive and are provided to individual students with the highest level of need. And so in a tiered intervention model, the bottom tier includes dropout prevention strategies, just as I mentioned, for all students in the school. They usually cost the least for the school, and all students benefit from them. Some areas that are addressed are things like rigorous coursework, teacher effectiveness, extended learning time, and whole school improvement. But for a subset of students, the dropout prevention strategies for the whole school may not be enough to engage them in school and encourage them to perform well academically. So these students are identified using data from tools like the Early Warning Systems tool that we just presented and that we'll present more in depth next week. And this allows you to give targeted supports. And I should say the tool allows you to label supports in your school as academic, behavioral, or attendance-oriented, as well as the tier that they are supposed to be addressing. And then the more targeted and individualized strategies usually cost more money. They're at the top of the pyramid, and they are for an even smaller subset or individual students. So, as I mentioned, the intervention piece can be a big challenge. The goal of identifying students who are at risk of dropping out is just the first step, and it can be some work, especially when you're initially getting started and getting over the hump. But the interventions put in place for the identified students to prevent them from dropping out is a major point of focus. And the research is limited, honestly. However, the What Works Clearinghouse did come out with a list of evidence-based programs. And from that, the National High School Center looked at those programs to identify the characteristics of the programs that seem to keep students on track. And again, these aren't always your traditional dropout prevention programs. They could just be supports and that type of engagement that I've been talking about. But these are all elements that were identified within these evidence-based practices. And what we've seen groups do as they've looked at the interventions and supports that they have available in their schools in their districts is to kind of go down this list and start to really consider whether their intervention is including some of these strategies. And is actually embedding some of these strategies to further engage students. And then after that, these are some dropout prevention programs that are available in the middle grades or high school grades, and they have been found to have positive or potentially positive effects in preventing students from dropping out. And these are available in the Doing What Works clearinghouse, actually. So step 6, monitoring students and interventions. This is a huge leap. This is what distinguishes the type of implementation model we're talking about here in the National High School Center's work from a lot of other early warning system work you hear about out there. Monitoring students and interventions has multiple purposes. First, it allows users to monitor students' progress in the interventions. Second, based on this monitoring, the team can make mid-course adjustments to the course of action for students, depending on the way they progress. So if a student's doing well, you could choose to maintain participation in the intervention or support, or just continue it. Perhaps the student no longer needs it. But if the student is still displaying symptoms of risk and not seeming to get back on track, perhaps another more intense or different support that's a better match for the student would be appropriate. And looking at this data frequently allows you to make those adjustments before it gets too far. And then the idea is to improve this team's ability to match students to supports they need over time. And this skill starts to improve as the team does this work more and more. Third, this part of the process allows the team to determine how well the interventions or supports available at the school are meeting the needs of students in the school at this point in time. We all know that sometimes this part of the equation is sort of this unknown. And this tool allows users to sort of start to consider that and look at these interventions in which students are participating and reflect on the interventions themselves. For example, are the interventions being implemented with fidelity? Are they working? Are they working for the subset of students we thought they might work for? And are there needs that are not being addressed by the available supports and interventions that may need to be, and you may need to drop some interventions and adopt new interventions based on the specific needs of the students. And then last, step 7. This is a big step. It's about reflecting on the process and refining the process. In one single year of this process, the early warning system team will learn an immense amount of information, information that's going to impact individual students who are coming for the first time to their school, as well as the school itself and practices and policies involved, and just how to efficiently run an EWIMS team and focused on early warning system indicators in the school. I mean, there's different contextual factors we know in each school. Each school, each district is quite unique, and you have to start to make adjustments that accommodate that. So this is the last step in the process, but it has a big impact, and it's important to have some focus on it because it can really start to change the type of climate and leverage different changes and policies in the school to enhance and improve graduation outcomes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the questions.
Thank you, Susan. Again, this is Joe Harris. I'm going to facilitate a Q&A session. If you have specific questions that you would like to ask to either of our presenters, please use the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner or in the sidebar of your screen. We do have a question about the availability of the PowerPoint itself. The presentation, the recorded presentation that you saw today, as well as copies of the slides, will both be available on our website. It usually takes a few hours for us to do that, so I'd be comfortable saying it'll all be available by close of business tomorrow. If you need you can email us separately if you need an immediate copy of the PowerPoint presentation, but both the PowerPoint and the recorded presentation will be available by tomorrow. While we're waiting for some other questions to come in, I'm going to actually ask a few questions that came in for those that filled out the SurveyMonkey to register for the webinar today. So the first question I'm going to ask to Mindy, and that is, does the early warning system address students with disabilities?
Can you hear me, Joe?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. Definitely it would address students with disabilities. So we know that the students with disabilities are disproportionately represented in our group of students that drop out of high schools today, regretfully. And we know that those students many have similar needs, but some different needs than those students that are not receiving special education services. So in the research, the National High School Center has actually worked with the Consortium in Chicago Schools Research to actually re-examine their original analysis of the early warning system data that's helped us identify these specific indicators. And through their reanalysis, they actually found that these same indicators are just as valid for those students with disabilities, enabling us to identify those students even within that subgroup of students with disabilities that are at most risk. And then the early warning system tool can then take that, so using those same indicators can help schools identify those students with disabilities that are at risk. It also enables users to do reports that are specific to students with disabilities, and even breaking it up amongst that very heterogeneous group of students with disabilities, and look at disability category. And within the categories, look at the types of risk as displayed by each of the early warning system indicators.
Great.
Does that answer the question?
Thank you. So Susan, please share some information on how early warning systems are being used by schools, as well as innovative ways school district administrators have promoted the use of early warning system tools. I'd also add how state administrators are using them as well.
Okay. So we've had the opportunity, as I mentioned, to sort of be in this incubator period with a few states, and through that I've had the great opportunity to work with districts and schools and state education administrators. And so some of the key elements that I've observed is that first and foremost, it has to be a priority, and it has to be a priority from leadership that this is going to be a focus. And when that happens, it is amazing how quickly things align. The other thing that I've seen is that there sometimes are some mandates that are laid out. As I mentioned, in Virginia, for schools that are struggling with their graduation rate, the principal is actually required to be on the team. They also strongly encourage a district administrator, if not the superintendent, to be an active participant on the team. And I feel like I neglected to mention that active participation of a district, and the district encouraged and providing support by way of data analysis, as well as additional information in step 4 for interpreting data and getting information on students and what perhaps those root causes may be, is really critical and important, and can really start to help align and move this process forward. The other thing that is really critical is this idea of communicating your findings. So there are, obviously we have sensitive student information here, and we're not advocating that you share information about individual students per se. But within the school, having conversations with the adults who actually work with these students, and communicating with them routinely is really important, because sometimes when there's a really segmented school, often segmented by departments, for example, it's really critical information for a teacher to find out that the student may be struggling in mathematics but is doing great in English language arts. So getting those adults to connect together around a student is a really important piece. And then there's communication on a bigger level. It's communicating to the school-wide, allowing people to grasp and understand what's going on in the school, to understand that at a school in the first 20 or 30 days, this critical number of students are off track because they're missing too many days of school. Or at a district level, to look at patterns of students who are coming in with the incoming indicator of risk. What are those feeder patterns? What schools are they coming from? It gives you a lot of leverage to start to look more closely in a different way, and in sort of a neutral way, to just say, look at this data and how are we going to change this, and rather than making it personal.
Great, thanks, Susan. So, Mindy, we've gotten several questions that are around the some technical aspects of the tool. I know that we're going to discuss that next week at the webinar, that we're actually going to be inside the tool, both tools, and looking at some of the operational features. But several of these questions have been around importing data from either other programs such as X2 or other student information systems, and basically questions about importing data from multiple data sets. Can you talk for a minute about that process?
Yeah. So the tool enables schools to actually, from their student information systems, put data in a very specific way and create what's a source file. So basically an Excel spreadsheet that has student ID numbers and student attendance and course performance information in the specific columns. Once those are created, then that information can be uploaded into the tool, and the tool matches that data to the specific students by ID, not requiring actually then the school to put the information in the same order each and every time. So does the tool specifically handshake with individual student information systems? No, but the process of creating these source files, we found that once schools actually kind of get a grip on it, it's actually relatively quick and an easy process to do. And many schools have found that it's very rewarding to do it because it's such actionable information, unlike other kind of reporting that oftentimes is just summative in nature and not really formative, driving next steps. But in the next webinar, we'll definitely show that process and give specific details about how those source files are created. If you're interested in looking at the source files on the betterhighschools.org site, where you can download the tool, we also have there the source files, the blank templates, and they're just Excel files that are saved in comma delimited files. And we, in addition, have source files that are actually filled with fictitious student information, so you can also see what a completed source file may look like.
Great, thanks, Mindy. And you bring up a good point. I want to remind everybody that despite its looks and sophistication, the entire early warning system, both tools are built on Excel spreadsheets, and therefore they're runnable on any computer that runs Excel, and also they therefore can import any data that is formatted to be imported into an Excel spreadsheet. And that's one of the beauties of the system, and one of our design goals was to create a no-cost, easy-to-use piece of software, but that it was applicable in lots of different venues and lots of different computer formats. I see we're running out of time, and we have lots of questions that have come in the chat box and under the Q&A. So what I'm going to suggest is that we will make sure that we answer each of the questions and share those answers with everybody, either directly through an email or in follow-up through our community of practice that we'll be talking about during the next couple weeks. So in closing, I want to thank our presenters. I want to thank all of our audience for joining us today. And I want to remind you that we have some upcoming events. I mentioned two follow-up webinars, that this is the first of three. Next week at the same time, we're going to be looking at the technical aspects of using the EWS middle grades and high school tools, and in both of those, we're actually going to be live in the tools, operating the tools on the screen, and we guarantee you'll be able to see them better than you could see the screenshots today. So we hope you join us for that session. The following week, we will then feature some stories from the field and join and are inviting some of our colleagues from California and Virginia to share some of their experiences in implementing the tools in their respective states and school districts. I also want to pre-announce a community of practice that will be launching as part of that December 14th meeting that will enable us to set up some forums for technical individual users as well as members of the implementation team. We will store all the resources, and as some of you start to develop your own resources to support the tools, such as import files from these various student information management system programs, that will make that all available through a community of practice that we'll be rolling out on December 14th. Again, all of our products and tools, the EWS products and tools, are available on the link that you see on the screen. It's also directly accessible to the right in the chat box. If you click on the last link, you can get directly to the tools. And again, we invite you to visit the betterhighschools.org website, to join us on Twitter, and to become a fan on Facebook to continue the conversation and to continue our work together. Thanks to all of you for your participation, to our presenters for sharing the information. We look forward to talking to you next week, same time, same place. Take care.